There was pot roast on the table. Potatoes too, roasted the way I liked them, crispy edges, little sprigs of rosemary. Candlelight flickered off the stainless steel fridge. Dana sat across from my chair like a judge ready to sentence a man who forgot his tie in court. Her wine glass was already half empty. She didn't look up when I walked in, just kept swirling the glass like it held all the courage she could afford. "I'm done," she said. "I want a divorce." I stood there with my work boots still on, the scent of oil and engine grease still clinging to me. You'd think after 30 years she'd at least wait until I sat down. I walked over, picked up my plate, and started spooning the pot roast onto it. "I'm done, Richard," she repeated, sharper now. "Did you hear me?" "Yeah," I said, sitting down. "I heard." She blinked, waiting for what? Anger? Begging? Some dramatic crack in the foundation of the man she'd quietly detached from for years? "Works for me." Dana's face twisted, not in sadness, disappointment, as if I'd failed some final emotional test she thought I was too stupid to see coming. Her fork clinked against her plate. "That's it? After everything?" I shrugged, cutting into the meat. "You already made your choice. I'm just clearing the plate." "You always do that," she snapped. "Avoid real conversations." Maybe because I already lived through them in my head, hundreds of times. I stood, took my plate to the sink, and washed it under hot water while she sat there fuming. It was the quietest war we'd ever had. No slammed doors, no screaming, just the sound of running water and a woman watching her final play land with a pathetic thud. That night I packed one small bag, just clothes, tools, and a photo of my dad fishing on a lake in 1963. Left the rest. Didn't touch the bank accounts. Didn't open her messages. I even let her keep the dog. A French bulldog named Basil that hated me anyway. If you're still here listening, take a second to tap the follow button. Over 97% of people never do, and honestly, it helps us keep building these stories with everything we've got. Dana filed the papers 2 days later. I signed them without comment. No requests, no mediation. She told our friends I was weirdly calm, and that it was probably guilt. She spun stories like a politician at a podium. Emotional neglect, emotional distance, emotional, whatever else she could hang the failure on without touching her own actions. But see, when someone expects you to explode and you don't, it unnerves them. Makes them rethink every smug line they rehearsed in the mirror. Dana didn't want a divorce. She wanted a reaction. She wanted a man on his knees begging for the woman who hadn't touched him without obligation in 6 years. I gave her nothing. She didn't see the way I stopped filling the gas tank all the way. How I slowly moved tools out of the garage over the course of a month. How I unsubscribed from shared accounts quietly. How my name vanished from the property title 6 weeks before the candles even hit that table. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the drawbridge. She still slept in the house she wanted freedom in. She still posted inspirational quotes about choosing peace and evolving past those who can't love you fully. And she still hadn't noticed that my shadow no longer lived in any corner of her world. But you know what she did notice? That I hadn't told a soul where I went. Not even her sister. Not our grown son, Ethan. Not the guys at work. One day I was driving my pickup home at 6:12 p.m. like always, and the next, I was dust. A mutual friend asked if I was okay. She said, "He's just being immature." Sure, because when a man doesn't beg, scream, or lash out, he must be having a breakdown, right? No, I was just done playing the role. She thought she'd flipped the board and walked away victorious. But the game had already moved to a different table, and she wasn't invited. Dana told her sister over wine and spa cucumbers that I just nodded like an idiot, that I didn't even ask why. Apparently, that was supposed to prove I'd been emotionally unavailable all along. "He's so flat, so blank," she said. Honestly, it was like divorcing a furniture set. Her sister cackled like that was the cleverest insult she'd ever heard. I know this not because I asked, but because her sister's husband, Dave, is exactly the kind of man who keeps secrets like wet tissues. He leaks them everywhere when he drinks. She moved into her friend Lauren's guest house. That's code for the spare pool house Lauren's third husband never finished wiring. No hot water, spotty Wi-Fi, but it gave Dana the illusion of a new chapter. She lit scented candles and posted pictures of herself journaling in soft light, with captions like, "Learning to listen to my own voice." I saw every post, not because I followed her, but because I knew she wanted me to. She started telling mutual friends that I was stone cold, and that she should have left years ago, that our marriage had been a slow burn into silence. Like I was a broken furnace no one bothered to fix. I didn't counter it, didn't defend myself. I didn't call anyone, because the more she talked, the more she revealed what she needed people to believe, and what I no longer had to carry. While she was busy rediscovering sage tea and adult coloring books, I quietly emptied out $2,000 from our joint account. Then another $1,800. Then $3,100. Always under $5,000. Always legal. Always with a receipt. I funneled it all into a credit union under my name only. The same credit union my father once used to store cash when he didn't trust the economy, or his second wife. I transferred ownership of my truck to my brother under the pretense of simplifying the insurance. He didn't ask questions. Just slid the title into a safety deposit box and muttered, "I had a feeling." I canceled the cable, the trash pickup, the house alarm, all things in my name. The water bill was the last to go, but I made sure the timing worked just right. She wouldn't notice until the dishes stopped rinsing and the guesthouse tub turned brown. I wasn't being petty. I was being absent. She assumed I was avoiding the fight. The truth was, the fight had already ended. She just didn't know I'd won it by forfeit. One morning, Dana sent me an email. Just one line. "Do you care about anything at all?" I didn't answer. 2 days later, she followed up with, "This is why I'm leaving," which made me laugh, because she already had left. What was she trying to convince me of? That her absence hurt? That it was some kind of punishment? You can't exile someone from a kingdom they no longer recognize. She didn't notice I stopped collecting my mail. Didn't notice my work badge was never used again after my final shift. Didn't notice the garage key missing from its hook, or the empty drawer where my tools used to be. Dana wasn't paying attention to the details, because she thought the story was already written. She thought I was the abandoned husband, watching reruns in the dark, hoping she'd come home with apologies and kale smoothies. She didn't realize I'd stopped being part of her narrative the moment she handed me a plate of pot roast and announced our expiration date. The funny thing is, I didn't hate her. There was no anger left to give. Just space. Just time. Just the quiet hum of freedom wrapped in logistical efficiency. She thought she was watching me collapse. But all she was really watching was the outline of a man stepping backward into the trees, disappearing into his own blueprint. Because while she was choosing herself, I was already gone. I clocked out of my final shift on a Thursday. No cake, no farewell banner, no gold watch with my initials on the back. Just a silent locker room, a folded-up uniform, and a small handwritten note I left pinned to my locker door. 30 years. Time to breathe. I didn't even write my name. I'd been with that company longer than some of the managers had been alive. There was a time I might have expected a send-off. But now, the idea of ceremony felt like dragging a dying horse across a finish line it never agreed to run toward. I handed in my badge, nodded at the security guard on my way out, and left the parking lot without looking back. That was the last time I set foot in that building. By the next morning, I was already gone. I'd scouted the land 6 months prior. A neglected plot tucked along a dirt road near the base of a mountain range most people couldn't pronounce. Old game trails ran behind it, the kind my dad used to follow with a thermos and a rusted .30-06. No neighbors within shouting distance. No mailboxes. No cell signal worth chasing. The land cost less than Dana's wedding ring. I paid in cash. There was an old hunting cabin on the lot. Leaning, mildewed, smelled like it had secrets. Perfect. I ripped out the rotted drywall, re-insulated the walls, reinforced the floorboards with fresh timber I cut myself, wired in solar, hauled in a tank for water. It wasn't luxury. It was solitude earned and engineered by hand. The kind of place no one could accidentally stumble across unless you'd been there before. And even then, you'd need a damn compass. I turned my phone off on day 2. I didn't smash it or throw it into a river like some dramatic fool in a movie. I just turned it off. Slid it into a drawer next to the land deed and forgot about it. Social media accounts? Deleted. Bank apps? Gone. Photos? Saved to a thumb drive that now sits inside a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick on the bookshelf. Nobody needed to know where I was. Not even me sometimes. For 3 weeks I made no noise. Not online. Not by letter. Not even through third-party breadcrumbs. No cryptic quotes. No Spotify playlists. No surprise logins that might trigger a "Richard is back" moment. Dana had no idea what to make of it. According to one of her Facebook posts, yes, I had a burner. She thought I was retreating into some kind of man cave tantrum, said I was probably sulking in a motel, eating gas station beef jerky, and blaming her for my emotional constipation. That got 27 likes. A week later, the tone shifted. She posted a quote. Sometimes silence is the loudest scream. That one got 8 likes. Another few days passed. Then nothing. Her sister called my brother. Asked if I was okay. My brother said, yeah, then hung up. No follow-up. That's when it shifted from childish to strange. She began contacting mutual friends. Have you heard from Richard? Has he said anything about a cabin? Did he ever mention Montana, Oregon, Idaho? She assumed I'd left to find myself. No, Dana. I left because I'd already found what mattered, and it wasn't you. The silence became intentional not as a punishment, but as a declaration. There was nothing left for me to explain. Every explanation I'd ever offered her in our marriage had been met with deflection, defensiveness, or that go-doffel half-smirk she wore when she thought she was out arguing me. She didn't want answers. She wanted leverage. And now that she had none, the quiet was louder than a courtroom. Some nights I sat on the front steps of the cabin, a fire going in the pit, bourbon in a chipped enamel cup, and I wondered if she'd ever actually loved me, or just the idea of a man she could shape and eventually resent. Either way, I didn't need to know. I wasn't missing. I was just gone. And she was starting to realize that those aren't the same thing. Dana threw a new beginnings brunch, exactly 26 days after telling me she was done. The kind of brunch with overpriced mimosas, avocado toast plated like abstract art, and Fozen playlists humming out of wireless speakers. It was held on the back patio of Lauren's house. You know, the same Lauren who once told me I reminded her of her ex, in a good way, then laughed too hard to explain what she meant. Dana wore white. Not off-white, not cream. Full, blinding wedding dress white, like she was getting married to herself. She floated around the table with a glass of wine and a fake laugh you could hear from the driveway. I feel light, she kept saying, like I shed a 10-ton ghost. Her friends, all equally polished and strategically divorced, clinked glasses and nodded, but not all of them looked convinced. At one point, Angela, the quiet one who always brought her own food because she didn't trust seed oils, tilted her head and asked, "Did Richard do something? I mean, I always thought he seemed like a decent guy. Quiet, but kind." Dana didn't like that. You could see it in the way her grip tightened on the stem of her wine glass. "He was emotionally hollow," she said, voice a little too clipped. "You can't build a life with someone who's basically a placeholder." Angela didn't respond, just blinked slowly and reached for a grape. Later that afternoon, Dana posted a filtered photo to her Instagram. She was leaning against Lauren's backyard fence, holding a wine glass like a prize, one heel kicked up behind her. The caption read, "Unleashed." It got 37 likes. Then, about an hour later, the first comment appeared. "You sure about that?" No profile photo. No name. Just a burner account called @SungHostentwoods. Dana deleted the comment in less than 5 minutes. But not before 2 of her friends had already liked it. She brushed it off, told herself it was probably me being petty, or maybe Ethan, our son, trying to play middleman by making a point. She even sent him a message. "Did you leave a weird comment on my Instagram?" He replied, "What? No. Are you okay?" She didn't answer. That night, she texted Lauren, "People are so weird. Can't handle a woman moving on." Lauren didn't reply until the next morning. "Maybe just private your posts for a while." For a woman who'd always relied on validation like it was oxygen, the silence from her friends was its own kind of suffocation. The brunch hadn't landed the way she wanted. The narrative wasn't sticking. The applause she expected sounded muted. And worst of all, the one man she thought would spiral, chase her, beg her to come back, wasn't saying a word. It's funny what happens when you tell a story with yourself as the hero. People start remembering how the story actually felt. They start asking quiet questions. They replay conversations. They remember the time you mocked your husband for taking too long to pick a birthday card. The way you dismissed his hobby as old man tinkering. The eye rolls. The condescension. One of her friends, Trina, I think, posted a story later that night. A black screen with white text. The loudest ones are always hiding the most. No tags. But Dana saw it. She watched it twice. The phone logs always betray the denial. She began to wonder if maybe her version of events wasn't airtight. But the human brain is a master of narrative repair. So Dana patched the hole with more performative independence. A hiking selfie the next day. Caption: Nature never gaslights you. Another burner account commented, "Does it talk back?" Deleted within 2 minutes. That one rattled her more than she admitted. She started looking over her shoulder on walks, keeping her phone face down, locking Lauren's gate even though the neighborhood had private patrols. Because when silence surrounds you too long, it stops feeling like peace and starts feeling like someone's watching. Not with rage, not with pity, but with a memory sharpened into something cold and patient. The cabin was finally quiet in the way a man needs after living 3 decades in someone else's volume. No hum of a fridge, no bleeding microwave, no distant television drama arguing its last plot twist. Just the rustle of pine needles, the slow exhale of the wind off the ridge, and the rhythmic chop of an axe against oak that had dried just enough to split clean. Mornings were simple. I hiked a trail I cut myself, barefoot sometimes, just to remember how the earth felt without rubber and noise. Then back to the porch for black coffee and whatever paperback I'd fished out of the used box at the gas station 30 miles out. No titles that tried too hard. Just stories where things happened and consequences mattered. By week 4, I was starting to forget what her voice sounded like, which is exactly when my brother showed up. He didn't call. He never does. Just drove up the old path in his dust-choked Silverado like we were still 12 and sneaking out for fishing trips. No knock. Just the sound of boots on gravel and the creak of the screen door. He didn't say much. We're not big on ceremony. He set the folder on the table next to the tin ashtray I use for sunflower seeds and old screws. Worn manila, tied with red string like something out of a noir film. "Where'd you get this?" I asked, not reaching for it yet. He took off his cap, rubbed the back of his neck. "Friend of a friend. Same guy who helped me after Lisa. That was all I needed." I untied the string. Inside, printed screenshots, photocopied schedules, restaurant receipts, internal chat logs from a software firm in Tucson. First, nothing made sense. Different last names, gaps between dates, notes in the margins. But then I saw it. Near the back, tucked between a series of bank statements and one blurry surveillance photo from a wine bar in Phoenix. His name, circled in red. Devin Monroe. "Devin?" I said aloud, as if trying to taste the shape of the name again. She always said it was nothing. My brother didn't speak, just nodded. 3 years ago, Dana and I had dinner at his place. Lasagna, red wine. She left early, said she had to meet a friend. "Devin from marketing," she'd said, shrugging like it barely warranted a full breath. "He's helping me prep for the presentation next week." I didn't press her. That night, I stayed behind to help clean up. My brother said something I'd forgotten until this moment. "You ever wonder why she never mentions him when you're around?" I said, "She probably just knows I don't care about office stuff." He'd laugh then. "Yeah, that's exactly why." I flipped to the last page of the folder. A photo. Grainy, low light, but unmistakable. Dana, hair tied back, laughing. One of those unguarded laughs she stopped sharing with me years ago. And Devin, sitting close, her hand on his wrist. The kind of touch that says, "Remember what this meant." The date stamp was from 11 days before she told me she wanted the divorce. But that wasn't what hit me hardest. There was another photo. Same table. Same night. Only this one was from 3 years earlier. Same touch. Same laugh. I pushed the folder away and leaned back in my chair. It wasn't the affair that broke something in me. It was the precision, the premeditation, the calm with which she sat across from me that night, feeding me lasagna, letting me talk about the transmission I'd been rebuilding, while knowing she had another man's handprint on her hip. She didn't leave because she fell out of love. She left because she thought she'd covered her tracks. Only she hadn't, because betrayal doesn't hide in loud places. It's in the quiet exchanges, the canceled dinners, the inside jokes that don't include you, the names dropped with just enough inflection to make them forgettable. I looked at my brother. "This stays between us?" He nodded again, slower this time. "Good," I said, "because I'm not done yet." I poured 2 whiskeys, one for the man still sitting at the table, and one for the man I used to be, before I remembered how to listen in the silence. The cabin didn't just keep the world out. It held the truth in. The envelope looked like it had been soaked in rain, then dried under something heavy. The paper was thick, rough around the edges. No return address, no stamp. Just her name in ink that bled slightly through the fibers. Inside, One folded note. 2 words. Come alone. No signature. No threats. No context. Just a familiar handwriting that made Dana's stomach twitch, though she'd never admit it. She showed it to Lauren over coffee the next morning. "He's being dramatic," Dana said, swirling her spoon through a cappuccino she didn't touch, "trying to lure me into some pathetic reconciliation attempt." Lauren leaned in. "You think he'd really go to all this trouble after vanishing for weeks just to win you back?" Dana didn't answer, because no, she didn't think Richard was the type to try anything anymore. But she also couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't just about her. 2 hours later, she was behind the wheel, headed into a stretch of mountain road that hadn't seen fresh pavement in over a decade. The directions were written in block letters on the back of a gas station map, coordinates scrawled with unsettling clarity. She had to switch from GPS to compass halfway through, and by the time she pulled up to the clearing, the sun was already beginning its descent. The first thing she saw was smoke. Thin wisps curling from a chimney like the cabin had been waiting for her all morning. It wasn't rustic the way she expected. It looked intentional. Freshly sanded porch rails. A stacked pile of wood by the sidewall. The windows were spotless. Curtains drawn. The place looked too lived in for someone who claimed to want nothing to do with the world. She parked and got out, boots crunching over gravel. The air was sharp, crisp, not quite cold, but just enough to bite. The door was ajar. "Richard," she called. No answer. "Look, if this is some kind of closure thing, I came. Okay?" Still nothing. She stepped inside. The room smelled like cedar and old bourbon. Clean. Not man clean, obsessively clean. There were no signs of clutter. No beer cans. No messy dishes. Everything had a place. Which, if you knew Richard, was exactly the opposite of how he lived for the last 10 years of their marriage. She scanned the room. A single wood stove. A leather armchair. Books on the shelf, real ones with dog-eared pages, not decoration. A fresh log crackled in the fireplace. And then she saw it. On the table, 2 glasses. One with lipstick. Her eyes narrowed. "Is someone else here?" she asked, her voice a notch lower. "Richard." Still silence. She took another step, and her boots squeaked against the hardwood. The sound echoed in a way that made the cabin feel too open, too aware of itself, like a stage dressed to look lived in. She ran a finger across the table's edge. No dust. The glasses weren't props. They were used. She moved toward the back, past the bookshelf, toward what looked like a bedroom. But before she could open the door, something caught her eye on the mantel. A photo. Framed. Subtle. Almost like it didn't want to be noticed. It was old. Grainy. A dinner table. Her. Laughing. And next to her, Devin Monroe. She staggered back a half step like someone had shoved her. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hand went to her chest. She hadn't seen Devin in years. Not since. The door behind her creaked. She turned slowly. 2 chairs now sat at the kitchen table. And one of them wasn't empty. The air in the cabin shifted, not colder, but heavier, denser, like something was holding its breath. She didn't feel like she was in Richard's space anymore. She felt like she was in his plan. Dana didn't step forward. She couldn't. Her heels rooted to the polished floor like the cabin itself had clamped down on her ankles. At the table, under soft lamplight, with the fire casting slow-moving shadows behind them, sat Richard, calm, leaning back in his chair like a man who'd finished building something. Not a threat in sight, just the stillness of someone with nothing left to lose. Across from him, with a whiskey glass half full and his fingers interlaced tightly, sat Devin Monroe. Dana's breath caught in her throat. Not because she recognized him, she did immediately, but because he didn't look away, didn't fidget, didn't look surprised, as if he'd been expecting her. Her hand rose instinctively, like she was about to object in court. "Devin?" she whispered, her voice suddenly uncertain, thinning around the edges. He gave the faintest nod. Richard didn't smile. He just looked at her and said, "Sit." She didn't move. "Now, Dana." There it was, that tone. Measured. Not a command, but not a request either. The same tone he used when she'd once tried to gaslight him about a hotel charge from a city he'd never been to. Back then, he dropped it, let it slide, like he always did. But now? His eyes were the same shade of gray as the storm clouds rolling behind the cabin's single window. She stepped forward mechanically, dropped into the empty chair. The table was bare except for the whiskey, 2 folders, and an old ceramic ashtray she remembered from their garage years ago. Devon's hands were trembling now, just enough to betray the still mask on his face. She looked at him hard. "You said you moved to Chicago." "I did." "You said." "I know what I said." His voice was barely above a whisper, but it sliced her open with more honesty than he ever used when they were sneaking around years ago, whispering in office corners and lying to spouses with the smooth efficiency of seasoned cowards. She turned to Richard, her posture shifting into the rehearsed mix of concern and irritation she'd always defaulted to. "What is this, Richard? Some twisted intervention?" Richard didn't answer right away. He poured himself a splash more whiskey. Devon declined with a tiny shake of his head. Richard set the bottle down. "You remember that night at Barry's retirement dinner?" Dana blinked. "I asked you if you wanted dessert. You said no. Said you had a headache. Left early. Took the Camry." She said nothing. He continued, "That was the night he jerked his chin toward Devon without looking at him. "Checked into the Marriott across from your firm." Dana's face twisted. "You've been spying on me?" "No," Richard said. "I've been listening. For 3 years. To the silence. The gaps. The details that didn't match." She turned to Devon, her voice low, shaking. "Why are you here?" Devon finally looked up. "Because I owe him. And I owe you something, too. But only one of those debts I plan to settle." Dana's mouth opened, then shut. All the confidence, all the posturing from the brunches and Instagram captions and wine-fueled declarations about freedom drained out of her like bad wine through cracked crystal. Because this wasn't about a failed marriage. It wasn't even about the divorce. This was about what she'd buried, what she'd called harmless, what she'd shrugged off with a smirk and a "you're being paranoid." And now the past sat across from her in a dimly lit cabin, shoulder to shoulder with the man she thought she'd quietly outmaneuvered. "Richard?" she began, trying to summon some version of the woman who always won arguments by acting bored. "Whatever you think this proves." He cut her off with a single raised hand. "No speeches," he said. "Not tonight." She looked at Devon again, older, grayer, eyes hollowed out by some consequence she didn't yet understand. And for the first time in years, Dana felt something she didn't expect. Not guilt, not remorse, not anger. She felt cornered. And it wasn't the man she cheated with making her feel that way. It was the man who never raised his voice, and never needed to. Richard reached under the table. Not quickly, not dramatically, just calmly, a hand disappearing into the shadows for a moment, then reappearing with a small, square recorder. Digital. Basic. The kind you'd find in a journalist's bag or a courtroom's evidence locker. He pressed play. A click. A faint hiss of background noise. The gentle clink of cutlery. Muffled jazz in the distance. Then her voice. "He'd never suspect. He doesn't ask questions. That's the best part." Dana froze. The audio quality wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. The tone was unmistakable. Her laugh followed the words, lazy and low, the kind she used to deploy like bait in a pond full of dumber fish. Devon flinched. Not visibly, but his neck tightened like he'd swallowed something sharp. Then came the second phrase, slower this time. "You were always the one I should have ended up with." A pause. And then, in the recording, his voice. "So why didn't you?" Her reply. "Because I married safe. Not smart." Richard stopped the recording. The silence that followed wasn't empty. Pulsed. Dana's hand trembled against the edge of the table. She glanced between the two men, Devon refusing to meet her eyes, Richard watching her like a biologist observing a new parasite under glass. "That's taken out of context," she said, voice brittle, already snapping under its own weight. "We were drunk." "That wasn't." Richard tilted his head. "It was a work dinner." You told me you were stuck late reviewing payroll reports." "I don't even remember saying that." "But you did." He leaned back, the recorder still sitting on the table like a loaded gun neither of them had to fire. It had already gone off. Dana looked at Devon, desperate now for something. Shared guilt, complicity, denial, anything. But Devon looked older, deflated. His hands were folded like he was in confession. His lips moved slightly, like he was whispering a prayer no one would hear. "Devon?" she asked, her voice cracking. Still, he didn't look up. Richard finally spoke again. Soft, icy. "I didn't suspect, Dana." He paused. "I confirmed." It wasn't said with malice. There was no raised voice, No righteous fury. Just the tone of a man who'd spent years collecting fragments. Waiting, watching, learning the shape of a lie so well he could carve around it without ever touching the blade. Dana stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Is this the part where you blackmail me? Humiliate me? Drag me through the dirt because I made a mistake? Richard blinked. Slowly. You think this is about humiliation? She faltered. This isn't revenge, he continued. This is documentation. Dana's throat tightened. Her hands clenched. So what? You're recording me now too? Is this all part of the show? Richard gave the faintest shrug. No need. And that's when she realized he didn't have to prove anything else, because she'd just done it for him. Devon finally spoke. One sentence. I didn't know you were still married. Dana turned to him like he'd stabbed her. What? That's a lie. But the look in his eyes, pure shame, told her otherwise. Richard didn't move, didn't flinch, just let it all unfurl, like a magician who already knew the trick had worked long before the reveal. You're not being accused, he said. You're being seen. And for the first time, Dana understood something terrifying. She'd always assumed Richard's silence meant ignorance. But no, it had meant patience. Richard reached beneath the table again. Same drawer, same quiet deliberation, and pulled out a manila envelope. No markings, no labels, but it sat between them with the weight of a verdict. Dana didn't touch it. Go on, Richard said, gesturing toward it like a man offering a final drink to a guest who's long overstayed their welcome. Her fingers hovered over the tab, then finally flipped it open. Inside were 6 pages. Legal, clean, typed in that unassuming Times New Roman lawyers love so much when they're about to legally amputate something. She skimmed. The words hit like bricks through glass. No spousal support. No claim to retirement or investment accounts. All rights to newly acquired rural property waived. Her heart dropped. What the hell is this? Richard leaned forward slightly, his hands still folded. Calm. A trade. She laughed, but it cracked in the middle. You can't seriously think I'd agree to this. I don't think, he replied. I know, because the alternative is worse. Dana's lip curled. Are you threatening me? No, Richard said, then pointed gently at the digital recorder still sitting like a coiled snake between them. You already threatened yourself. I'm just offering you a way to control the blast radius. She looked at Devon, seething. You're okay with this? With being used like this? But Devon still wouldn't meet her eyes. He just spoke softly to Richard. I'm sorry. Dana's head whipped around. You're apologizing to him? I gave up everything for you. Now Devon looked at her. Then you made a mistake. It was brutal, quiet, unrecoverable. Dana's throat burned, her vision blurred for a second, and all she could feel was the heat in her palms. Rage boiling over and going nowhere. She could scream. She could argue. She could throw every legal clause she had memorized from Google and her lawyer's retainer agreement. But Richard hadn't built this to be beaten in court. He built it to be finished before it ever got there. Her voice dropped. What if I don't sign? Richard's eyes didn't flinch. Then I release the audio, not just to lawyers, to anyone who wants it. Dana scoffed. That's blackmail. No, he said flatly. It's archiving. Her breathing hitched. You wouldn't. You're not that kind of man. I wasn't, he agreed. But that was before you spent 3 years turning me into a cautionary tale while planning a new chapter with someone who couldn't even look you in the eye tonight. She looked down at the papers again. The lines were clean, the margins wide, the legalese airtight. There were no traces of bitterness in the wording. No gloating, just logic. Cold, final logic. She tried one more time, her voice low and trembling. You're really going to make me walk away with nothing? Richard tilted his head. You walked away a long time ago. This just makes it official. And somehow that hurt more than any threat. She picked up the pen he'd set beside the envelope. Her hand shook. The signature didn't. She slid the documents back across the table, lips pressed tight. Fury trembled in every inch of her skin. But there was nothing left to burn that hadn't already turned to ash. Richard tucked the envelope into his satchel without looking at it again. The matter for him was closed. Devon rose first, murmured another apology. Again to Richard, never to her, and stepped toward the door. Dana sat, frozen, a statue of someone who'd once felt untouchable, because now she understood. Her power didn't come from lawyers or brunch posts, or knowing how to spin a story. It had come from Richard's silence. And he'd just made it clear that silence was optional. Dana stepped out into the cold, the cabin door groaning behind her like it resented having ever opened for her in the first place. Gravel crunched beneath her boots. The wind had changed, sharper now, or maybe it was just her blood cooling as adrenaline drained from her limbs. She didn't look up at the sky. She couldn't tell if the clouds were thick with snow or smoke or just the weight of what she'd done catching up with her in physical form. She walked 10 paces before the urge overtook her. She looked back. The door was still open. Inside she could see them barely. Richard still seated, elbow on the table, chin resting on his hand, staring at nothing in particular like a man who'd finally filed his last piece of paperwork and had nothing more to organize. Devon sat across from him, shoulders collapsed inward, as if gravity had been waiting for this moment to drag him down fully. Neither of them looked at her. Richard didn't even glance up. And that, more than the threats, more than the tape, more than the signature, was what finally broke something permanent in Dana. Because for 30 years, Richard always looked back. Even when she snapped. Even when she belittled. Even when she flirted too hard in front of other men just to prove she still had it. He always looked back. Not this time. She got into her car with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Not from fear. Not from cold. From the realization that she'd just left the final room she'd ever be allowed into. And no one had even closed the door behind her. 2 weeks passed. She kept her posts minimal. She told people the divorce had finalized quietly, that they'd mutually agreed on terms, that Richard was doing his thing, and she was focused on healing. But there were no brunches now, no filtered selfies, just long days in Lauren's spare room, sipping wine she couldn't taste, watching shadows crawl across the ceiling at night, wondering if Richard had told Ethan, wondering if Ethan already knew. Then, one morning, it happened. She was scrolling, habitually emptily, when she saw it. Post. From a throwaway account with no friends, no followers, no bio. One photo. The cabin. Early morning mist curling across the field like fog from a myth. Smoke rising from the chimney. One chair on the porch. Empty. Facing east. The caption read, "Reclaimed." No tags. No hashtags. No names. But it hit her chest like a cinder block. Because she knew. Not just that Richard had posted it. But that it was for her. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't revenge. It was the final punctuation at the end of a story she thought she'd written. She stared at it for a long time, refreshed the page. Nothing changed. She texted Devon one last time. "You okay?" The message sat unread for 2 days. When he finally responded, it was one line. "I resigned." No explanation. She searched his name the next morning. The company directory was gone. His LinkedIn said currently restructuring. But Richard was nowhere. No address. No voicemail. No social trails. He had, in every sense of the word, erased her. Not publicly. Not violently. He hadn't needed to destroy her reputation. He just stopped letting her rent space in his reality. And somehow that was worse. Because you can defend yourself against accusations. But you can't argue with absence. Not when it's surgical. Not when it's clean. Not when the last thing left behind is a single word carved in digital stone. Reclaimed. And you're not part of it.